In recent months, I've found myself playing with multiple coordinated teams around my level that have included a Bloblobber, which is pretty rare. It had a moment near launch in Splatoon 2, but since then it's been relatively unpopular in competitive play. That's not to say there aren't people who know how to play it really well. Every weapon in the game has been explored significantly by top players because, contrary to what noisy vocal minorities in YouTube comments and Reddit threads would have you believe, top players are very willing to experiment and play whatever ends up working. But it's never found enough success for us to see it used at an elite level in tournament unless there's some Japanese one trick I don't know about. Most of the Bloblobber players I've encountered have enthused about the potential for an aggressive Bloblobber playstyle. The weapon has a reputation for being a paint bot, a weapon that's just on the map to put a lot of paint on the ground, put out a lot of ink storms to support fights, and maybe occasionally get lucky and actually do some chip damage with the main weapon that helps a teammate get a combo off. They can play a bit more aggressively in narrow corridors by ricocheting their shots off walls to give them 2 opportunities for a blob to hit you instead of 1, but you can't take every fight near level geometry that lets you do that, especially if you want to ever move forward from your current position. So while it's great for the weapon to have, it's unreliable. A major weakness of the Bloblobber as a weapon is its tremendously slow projectile travel time. You can just see the blobs coming and sidestep out of the way. Sometimes they can trap you and force you to move through at least a little bit of Bloblobber damage, but unlike in Splatoon 2, now you can squid roll through that. The fact that they have incredible range often doesn't matter that much because instead of doing damage, they only force a player to move a little, so it's a very slow weapon at taking space away from the enemy team. The notion of an aggressive Bloblobber then is a weird one. Aggressive weapons are fundamentally more likely to get into fights, especially at close range, because they're the weapons that are trying to push up and get around blind corners, or get up under ledges, or work from behind cover. The Bloblobber has a better damage output at close range, since projectile travel time isn't as big of a deal at point-blank range, but that doesn't mean it's great damage even then. It's got a similar problem to the nozzle noses, where if you aim each individual shot perfectly, yes, you will one-shot, and it'll be relatively quick. But as soon as you miss even one projectile, your time to splat goes up dramatically, because you have to wait for the cooldown on your slosh to end, and then aim another one and wait for the slow projectiles again. A slow fire rate has always been an important design choice for balancing the slosher class weapons. The vanilla slosher, tri-slosher nouveau, and previous patch sloshing machines showed that a fast fire rate isn't necessary for a weapon to be a top-tier choice. But to compensate, those weapons had very, very reliable damage output. They had big hitboxes that you could use to hit people over the tops of ledges and down over whatever cover they were hiding behind. They were much harder to miss with than a more precise weapon like a charger or a shooter. They only had so many shots, but those shots were more likely to count in skilled hands than your average shooter bullet. The Bloblobber doesn't have a big, reliable hitbox like that. The blobs are about the size of a typical shot from a shooter class weapon. A lot of the time you hit someone, you won't do the full available damage. You often only hit one shot for 30 damage. Because of the way your shots bounce off the ground, if someone's standing on a grate, it's suddenly a much more difficult aiming task to hit them with the Bloblobber. And even something as crucial as splatting someone who's standing on tower is non-trivial because of the way you have to arc the shots to land them in the right place. Other sloshers don't have that problem. A tri-slosher just mashes ZR in the player's general direction, and as long as they aim high enough to go over the wall and have the range to reach, they're probably going to splat them. The current Bloblobber kit is very supportive, maybe a little more so than even the Bloblobber ones. In Splatoon 2, there were 2 kits, one with Splash Wall Inkstorm, and the other with Sprinkler Suction Bomb Rush. And it's pretty widely said that the Splatoon 3 Bloblobber got the weaker elements of each of those 2 kits in its Sprinkler and Inkstorm. Splash Wall and Suction Rush allowed it to play area denial more aggressively, where the Splash Wall compensated for its weak damage output by letting it stay out on an open sightline for longer before getting forced out, and the Suction Rush gave it a powerful boost to that high paint area denial playstyle. The current Bloblobber just doesn't have a lot of stopping power. Instead of saying, you better get out of that spot right now or else, it's more like, you should probably move away from that, like, eventually, you know? The paint that it outputs is pretty impressive, which makes it a halfway reasonable support option for weapons that need paint to be set up, like Tetradualies, weapons that can feel like they make up for the Bloblobber's lack of aggressive potential by kinda just trying to solo the enemy team. If one of those blobs you're using to paint happens to tag an enemy player, that just makes the Tetra's job a little bit easier, and it does it in a really safe way. It also gives the Tetra's player someone it'll likely be pretty safe to jump back into when they feed. Get good value out of their quick respawn gear. Yeah. The Bloblobber Deco Kit, though, feels like it's made for the players who want aggressive Bloblobber to be a thing. If there's any weapon that stands to benefit from Line Marker, it's probably the Rapid Probe that already has it. But if there's another weapon that stands to benefit from it, it might be the Bloblobber. Because if it's really playing for splats, having the longest range sub-weapon in the game that combos against someone who's been hit by 2 blobs could improve its threat to actually splat someone for once. Unless they're running even 1 sub of bomb defense, but let's not worry about that for right now. Kraken is going to allow it to make aggressive plays it would never have dreamed of before, and it's going to paint for that Kraken really quickly, making it a reliable source of them if you just need high Kraken output on your team for whatever reason. For some people, this feels like the first aggressive Bloblobber kit. For me, it feels more like your local quirky lovable dad who's an upstanding member of your community, tells you the same bad joke every time he sees you, going through a midlife crisis. So now he's wearing sunglasses everywhere, and he's got a leather jacket, and he bought a motorcycle so he can make loud noises with it. You were already cool, Paul, just in a different way than society has taught you to accept. You don't have to do all this if it's not real to you. I think Bloblobber will continue to see the most success used as a very supportive weapon, which may not be the playstyle all the G Fuel blooded Call of Duty prodigies want to see, but it's the one that Blob does best. This kit may well be fine playing that way, again, if Kraken is a big part of getting the rest of your team in, but the one Bloblobber player in the West who's really brought it up to a high competitive level, Isaac, appears to disagree. Looks like it'll be kind of fun, though.